Recording in progress. There we go. So yes, I'll officially introduce myself now for you all folks. So my name is Carl Hughes. I'm a member of various Facebook groups, which is how you've obviously come to be in this this workshop with me this evening. And I thank you very much for coming. I will explain a little bit about myself as we start the presentation, but as I kind of mentioned just before we started the recording there will be opportunity for questions as well. If you're afraid you might forget, because we all get a bit forgetful, pop the message down in the chat box. So at the bottom of your screen, if you're on a laptop or if you're on a phone, there should be an option on there somewhere to click chat and type a little message in there. Type your question in it at any point and we'll pick it up at the end and go back over it there. Okay. And please, 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 I've been in your shoes. No question is silly. Okay. So, and if for whatever reason I don't know the answer, I'll go away and find the answer out and I'll come back to you and make sure that I can give you that answer, okay? So yes, so let's start sharing this screen and get the presentation going. There it is. Share. Yeah, oh, wonderful. Now, for anybody that's good with the little functions, the animations or anything else, can somebody just put a thumbs up or something just so that I know that you can see the screen saying perfect in action versus imperfect action. Thank you very much, Melissa. There you go, and Julie. Fabulous. Yes, so one thing I will say is, and hopefully I've done it in the right way, and I'm more than happy to have feedback at the end of this if I haven't, but I keep the presentation very simple because I know some presentations can have things shooting in from the side or fading in and fading out and everything else. We all have, or in a variety of symptoms and different challenges that we're going through. So I have just left it as pure and simple. So it will seem a bit boring, but that's kind of the idea. Okay. And as I say, the conversation today is talking about perfect inaction versus imperfect action, which in the context of what I'm talking about today is where hopefully we can find that perfect balance at which we can then progress. Okay. Who am I? Kind of an important question, really. Let me move that. The faces were in the way of my writing. Typical. I should know who I am, though. So, for those that weren't on my first workshop, in 2019, I fractured my skull following a collapse at home and had a brain hemorrhage. As a result of that, I ended up with obviously concussion, with post-concussion syndrome, and really probably had very similar experience to a lot of you where I didn't always necessarily get the information I needed from the professionals. I know there's a young lady on here, Susie. I think she's in the UK's post-concussion syndrome group. And really, I only really realised I had post-concussion when I went into that group and started to chat with people. And I imagine it's probably the same for whatever Facebook group you've been in to find people that suddenly understand what's going on. And when I say they're following my extensive recovery from the injury, when I say extensive, what I mean is I didn't get back to, let's say, a working version of myself. I didn't get back to a working version of myself till 12 months onwards. But 4 years onwards now, I have very little effects still. I still probably would say I still get fatigued easier than I did before the injury. Which I don't think is actually a bad thing in a way, because it's kind of that little reminder I need for myself to say slow down sometimes. And I lost my sense of smell and taste as a result of my injury, so I still have that one. If anybody needs to know about that, it's called anosmia. Message me afterwards. We won't go into it today. But yeah, after I recovered, I obviously decided to go away and learn more about the brain, because I wasn't happy with, well, the service I got here in the UK from the medical professionals, the information I got, and the information that really a lot of other people have had as well. So I went away to look at that. And obviously, as part of that, I've completed courses on neuroplasticity and neurolinguistic programming, and obviously the idea of what I want to do. And I won't go into specifically what I do, because that's part of obviously being able to share this with you. Is I'm not here to sell anything to you, okay? But what I do is obviously try and help as many people as I can, which hopefully some of you have seen in the Facebook groups that I'm part of, that I'm always happy to have a conversation and share information. So that's briefly who I am. The picture on the left is me probably about 6 months in, looking a bit spaced out, not quite sure what day of the week it is. The picture on the right is me earlier this year running an ultra marathon. So for those of you that kind of go, is it possible to, get back to doing exercise or getting back to doing some of the things I want? Yes, it is absolutely possible. Okay, it really is. And hopefully with the right help, you can do that. So why this particular subject? Well, basically because we're all different. Okay, so in the two sections that I'll talk about, you'll probably find that one of the 4 options applies to you in some way, or you'll hopefully be able to relate to one of them in some manner. And then it's about finding what works out for you. Okay, and that's what it is. What will work for you to help you move forward is really the grand scheme of it, to be honest. I am aware I talk a lot, so if you see me clicking off to the side, it's to make sure that I've not got to like 5 to 8 and I'm still not through half of the presentation. So let's find out what works for you. Yeah, let's do that. What does balance in the brain injury recovery look like? So hopefully most of you can relate to this. From the kind of hundreds and thousands of people that I've spoken to through the groups and everywhere else, what I would say is, and this isn't a hard written line for everybody, but mostly people would say their 3 kind of main problems are a lack of understanding of other people, the feeling of isolation that then goes with that because you feel like nobody understands, family, friends wise, people judge you, people suggest things. Oh my goodness, I had that. I had a really bad headache for a week. Really not the same thing. Really not the same thing. So they're always encouraging you to do this or to do more and so on and so forth. I certainly had it with my family. And then the other one is kind of it then makes you doubt yourself. So you have that indecision almost. And that's where the balance aspect comes in. It's being able to balance that, making the right decision at the right time when you're kind of doubting yourself. So it's a knowing about when to push yourself on to try and recover more, but also then knowing when your symptoms are there and when you need to rest. And that really is the massive kind of point. It sounds really simple to write in front of you, go, yeah, it's really easy for you to say, Carl. And it is really easy for me to say because it's in front of me. It's really easy for me to say. At the time when I was struggling with those pictures a couple of slides ago, I would have probably said some mean words to you and said, you're talking out of your... Anyway, you get the idea. So yes, it's massively about knowing where you are in your journey. So yeah, let's discuss that. This one? There we go. As I say, remember, if for any of these examples it triggers something, you go, oh, I can relate to that, pop it in the chat, okay? Or you get a question for it, pop it in the chat. Okay, that's the easiest way. And then, as I say, I've got 2 slides here on perfect inaction. After the 2 slides for perfect inaction, we're just going to take that 5-minute break, okay, catch our breath, absorb what information's gone in before we then move on to the next bit, okay? Plus for me to take a sip of drink because I talk too much. So, perfect inaction, a good example of perfect inaction, because both sides of the scale here have good and bad ways we can use it. So when we say perfect, what do we mean? Well, we're talking about the scenario where we recognize the symptoms that we're struggling with. And that is certainly half of the battle quite early on. It's recognizing what symptom relates to your brain injury recovery, and what might relate in a different way. And I mentioned it in my previous workshop a little bit about the cycle and the neuroplasticity and the connections in our brain. So what I'd say is pop in the chat if you need me to explain a little bit more of that. I don't want to take away from today's presentation if you all understand it. So if you want me to explain a bit more about the connections in the brain and how that affects these aspects, pop it in the chat. And if we've got 10 minutes at the end and there's no other questions, I'll go through explaining it then. If not, I'll explain it happily to you outside of this. Just drop me a message. Okay. So recognizing the symptoms that we've got. We all know post-concussion syndrome and certain aspects that we struggle with and don't struggle with. And in that context, different things, we all have different symptoms, but a lot of them, more often than not, will possibly be the same. Okay. Light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, headaches, extreme fatigue, memory loss, struggling with our memory, decision making, all those sorts of things, and loads more, all come under that banner of post-concussion syndrome. But that perfect scenario we're talking about here is recognizing those symptoms, taking appropriate rest. Knowing when to take appropriate rest is a tricky one, and avoiding excessive stimulation or activity. So an example of that is, say you're having a bad day. In that bad day, though, you've managed to recognize that you've got a headache, you feel sick, you feel dizzy, you're absolutely exhausted. At that point, now I know we all have different responsibilities in our life, but at that point, we really need to stop. Okay. Again, it's one of those that's going to be easy for me to say. If you've got to pick up the kids from school or you've got to do a certain other task, it's hard to stop. But if it's something that can be put off for a little while at least, do so. Because it's when we push on, when we recognize that our symptoms are kicking in, that we really struggle. So stop, and we're recovering. We all have certain things that work for us. You may be early on in your journey and not quite know what works for you yet. And that's part of the discovery. Maybe it is some of these things that I've mentioned here. It's about bringing yourself calm. It's about relaxing your brain to the point of understanding exactly where you are. So we recover, use predetermined strategies to bring calm. So whether that's breathing techniques, because breath works, it works for certain people, whether that's meditation, which is something I've got into even just recently in the last few months. Meditation I find very calming before I go to bed, before I go to sleep at night. So I use it at that point. I don't, obviously, because I'm at a different stage to you, I don't really use it in the context of where I'm struggling. And hypnotherapy, obviously, if that's into it, there are lots of people out there that can do it. And there's obviously many more options with that. There's different things that will work for you and not work for you, depending on your surroundings. Maybe you live out in the countryside and you find a local field like the one that's showing behind me, and you find that particularly calming. Maybe just sitting on the sofa and having your pet cuddle up to you, that works for you. Whatever works for you, that still counts as inaction. Okay, so it's recognizing where you're at, stopping yourself and saying, no, let's not do anymore. And then obviously working through that recovery phase before you then move on to doing something again. Okay, so that's the first part. That's a good example of where you're in a good place. And you say, well, I'm not in a good place, Cole, because I've got a headache, I'm nauseous, I'm dizzy, and I'm exhausted. Recognizing that is key. And it's not something to feel down about, because we all go through it. I went through it, you're going through it, and everybody else that's in all our groups have days where their symptoms are worse than other days. And if you recognize those symptoms at that time, then you find yourself in a position where you can then say, well, I know where I am. I know I'm having a bad day. I'm not going to push it, because as you probably all do know, if you're having a bad day and you then have to do something else, I don't know, there might be some of you that have had to go back to work, and you're having a bad day and you carry on working, or you have to do some household chores, or you have to do some things with the kids, you know that might then ground you or stop you from doing things for 2 or 3 days. So that's where stopping yourself at that point might mean that tomorrow you're having a much better day and you're able to do stuff. Okay, so that's the first step of that. Okay, the bad side of it. I like using some pictures on there. I've got a bit like the bottom left picture. I've got a bit like that on me at the moment because my kitchen lights didn't work too well. So I've got a fluorescent light in my eyes, which is not wonderful, but thankfully doesn't really give me any issues anymore. So perfect in action, but on the bad side of things. Well, I talked earlier about the kind of indecision the kind of doubt, the self-doubt we have, especially when we get a bit further along the line of our recovery, or still struggling maybe a year after our injury, etc. So what does perfect look like in that sense? Well, maybe you haven't got any symptoms at that point. Maybe nothing. You've woken up and you feel okay. You don't feel horrific. You haven't got a headache. You haven't particularly got anything planned for the day, but you feel all right. Okay, so what do we then do? We procrastinate over what to do. Can I do something? What happens if I do this? Is this going to make me worse? I don't really want to ruin a good day. Well, what makes a good day for you? And again, this will be different for all of you at the moment. What makes a good day for you? It might be playing with the kids. It might be being able to do the household chores. It might be being able to go to the supermarket. I picked a Black Friday picture. So I'll come to that in a second. But yeah, we procrastinate. We think we kind of sit there and spend probably far too much time overworking our brain just to figure out whether we should do something or not do something. So then we end up making excuses for waiting until everything feels right. So what I would say is this, and I think you already all know this anyway with regards to your recovery. Everything doesn't ever really feel right. If you remember before your injury, did everything ever really feel right? Does that actually exist? Is, I suppose, the concept I would say is, depending on how busy your lives were before your injury, was anything ever really right? Did you occasionally have a headache? Did you feel tired? Did you just get on with it? Did you work 12-hour days and feel exhausted most of the time? I guarantee that probably one or so of your symptoms was in there somewhere beforehand anyway. So in that context, the perfect scenario, waiting until everything feels right, probably won't come. So then it's the next best scenario, isn't it? And waking up without symptoms gives you an opportunity to plan your day with the most simplest of actions, especially if you haven't got anything planned. If there are, I always break it down into red, amber, and green. The red things are things that I know will cause symptoms. Well, if none of those red things need doing today, on a day when you haven't got symptoms, don't do them. Because if you kick in your symptoms, you're going to feel terrible about it. And then you're going to remind yourself in the negative spiral of how our brain works that, oh, I should have never done that. I should have never done anything today. I should have just sat at home in bed and done nothing. Well, that's not strictly true. We pick those green and amber jobs, the jobs that on a good day, the amber jobs we can do, you know, whether that is washing the dishes, doing some ironing, doing some washing, popping out and doing the school run instead of your partner potentially having to do it or a family member having to do it. And then there's those green jobs, those little things you can potter around and do that are not going to give you any symptoms. And the neuropsychologist I saw did it in a circle bubble. The red obviously in the middle, the bullseye aspect, and then the amber, and then the green. And it was really a case of keep yourself in that green and amber. If you can avoid putting yourself in the red, great. And on days like this, where you know that you're feeling okay, your recovery, where your brain will learn at its best, is where you do activities that you keep yourself from getting symptoms, but then you're actually doing jobs, you're doing chores. Because what happens is, and as I said, I can mention it more later or another time, but the negative cycle that we end up in and the positive cycle we end up in. If we end up in the negative cycle, and let's say we do a red job and then we feel terrible, that's going to reinforce the negative cycle in our brain that says we can't do that. What we want to be is in the positive side of our brain that says, you know what, I felt okay this morning, so I decided to do a few little jobs. I did those few little jobs and I still feel okay. That is blooming fantastic. I will take that every day for the next 2 weeks. Yes, please. Because what happens is your brain goes, I can do more than I realize. And one thing I would say is, I guarantee everybody in this meeting, this workshop today, can do more stuff than they realize they're doing. Because you probably don't think when you get up and you get dressed that counts as doing something. That when you get up and you brush your teeth, that counts as doing something. Or you have a wash, or you make your bed. they all count as jobs that you are doing every day that are helping you move and progress forward. And that's what recovery is. It's getting those jobs in there that are keeping you away from symptoms and finding where that threshold is. So the example I obviously mentioned in here is that you feel well, able to do more, you find reasons not to. You tell yourself maybe wait for tomorrow or to feel good for another couple of days before I then do something. Well, recovery, you won't have recovery in that then, because your brain isn't learning while it's doing anything sat at home still. Okay. Whilst it's sat there at home doing nothing, it's doing nothing except for reminding yourself you probably could have done something today. So you might put off going to the supermarket because of the lights, as I've mentioned, because of the noise. And these are the things that we imagine, don't we? When we say, when we get into that negative spiral inside our heads, we say to ourselves, what's the worst case scenario for me going to the supermarket today? Well, the bright lights are going to really do my eyes in, or it's going to be massively busy in the store, and the noise and the volume and the claustrophobia and the people and the crowds and everything else that I can't cope with. So we say, no, I can't do that. Is there anything to stop you phoning your supermarket and asking if it's busy? It sounds a strange thing to do. I don't think I know anybody that's ever done it, but you know what? I did do it. I phoned up my local supermarket when I was starting to recover and starting to feel better, which for myself was off the back of exercise, but through other methods. And I said to them, I said, how busy are you today? Is it fairly busy in there, or is it fairly quiet? And obviously the staff know best. And they were like, oh, actually, it's not too bad. Okay, great. I'm going to come along. And I just said to them, I have a disability. I struggle with crowds. I struggle with noise. So I just wanted to make sure. The same way your local supermarkets might have, if anybody hasn't done these, depending where you are in the world, of course, they have quiet times. There might be like a Wednesday morning or a Sunday afternoon where they have like a quiet hour. So yeah, and sometimes they do that for children with special needs, but they also do it for people like ourselves that have struggled through this battle. So perfect inaction. We've talked about the good side of it, where we're recognizing our symptoms have kicked in and we're taking appropriate rest. So we're not taking action, we're doing nothing, we're choosing to rest. Well, I suppose it is doing something, isn't it, really? We're choosing to rest, catch our breath, dampen everything down so that then we can go again. Okay. And again, that's just your brain will then just register, well, what I've just done that's caused these symptoms doesn't like that too much. So next time I do it, I'll do it slightly less, or something of that nature. And obviously the bad example we just talked about, where we then potentially go down the route of obviously stopping ourselves from doing something when we actually do feel okay. And actually, again, we're harming ourselves a little bit there, because we could potentially be doing little jobs and little things in that green and amber zone that we talked about, where we're actually going to help ourselves recover and remind ourselves, our brain, in a positive sense, we are capable of doing these things without having symptoms kick in. Okay, so folks, before I move on to the two slides for the alternative side of this, as I say, I'm just going to give 5 minutes. What time is it now? It's past on my phone here. So I'll just give till 25 to, if you need to go for a comfort break, if you need to go and grab a drink, please do. I'm going to leave the recording on. So as I say, if you don't want your screen, you don't need to put your video on. I won't be offended. You can just chat to me now if you want to about something that we've talked about, or you can pop it in the chat and I'll have a look at it as well. Okay, but if not, let's take 5 minutes just to catch our breath so that I can stop talking at you, and we'll come back to it. Okay. Look onto the extra slide there. Hi, Gus. Welcome. I can see.
Hi, how you doing?
Yes, not too bad.
Um, good.
It's Fergus, isn't it? It's not just Gus, or do you prefer Gus?
Either one is good. Yeah, thanks. Um, yeah, I'm based in Dublin, so thanks very much for arranging this. I really appreciate it. Um, it's just interesting what you have on the screen there at the moment. I was having this very discussion with one of my colleagues today, just about waiting to feel good, and it's just really difficult to know where your threshold is because um I find that as I'm going through this, I've been 2 years and 3 months at this now, and it's difficult to know where your threshold is and how far you can push yourself. Um, and you can have a good day, and you go out to do something, and let's say it's going to the butcher's to get some meat or whatever, and as you're coming home, you look at the pharmacy and you think to yourself, you know what, I need to get whatever in the pharmacy, and you pop in there and something will happen in the pharmacy, whether it's a child crying or there's I don't know, music or the air conditioning, anything, the lighting, something can just set you off, and it just makes, I just flee. I kind of leave the shop that I'm in or wherever it is that I'm in, and I just go home and get into bed and berate myself for pushing myself beyond my threshold. A, because I've forgotten, and B, because I should have known better than doing that. So it's trying to find that balance between saying to yourself, today's going to be a Netflix day, and probably tomorrow will be as well, because I can't face another 4 or 5 days of symptoms. Because what happens is if something sets me off, I could be in bed for 2 weeks afterwards, and I'm just like, I'm never doing that ever again. I'm never going to the pharmacy again, or I'm never pushing myself beyond where I want to be. And uh, I have noticed that as the couple of years have gone by, that each month, well, not each month, maybe every 3 or 4 months, my threshold does change a little bit. But I have noticed that where I was brave to push the threshold before, now I'm not brave anymore, because I know I've had it happen too many times, that pushing the threshold sends me into a downward spiral, and I'm scared to do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I mean, let me give you a different viewpoint, I suppose. For me, looking at it now, and when you talk about your threshold, as I say, when I recovered, mine was pure happenstance. I signed up to do a charity run I do every year, which is 100 days long, and it's meant to be 2 miles every day. And what I, because the group know me, I signed up and I said I might walk half a mile a day if I'm lucky. And they were like, that's absolutely fine. We know what's happened with you, Carl. Anything you can do, we massively appreciate. So I set myself a goal. And planning and goal setting is a massive part of recovery. Because if you set yourself a goal for that day of, even if it is getting out of bed, making the bed, getting dressed, brushing your teeth, and eating 3 meals a day, fine. Do that for a week straight. And if you're absolutely fine for that week straight, add another job in the next time. And what happened with me with my half a mile is I started with half a mile. And the first day I had to sit down. I wanted to puke. I wanted to vomit. I sat down. I felt dizzy. I felt horrible. And I walked back after an hour of sitting on the side of the canal and felt better. And then I went back. But by the end of the 100 days, bizarrely, I was able to run 10K again, 6 miles. And
Jesus.
it's because I set myself that goal daily of saying, well, this is something I'm really passionate about. I'm really passionate about doing something for this charity. And we all have different things that we're excited about and that get our blood flowing as such that gives us something, a goal to move forward for. And for me, it was just kind of that. So as I kind of went daily, my brain reminded myself I was able to do that. So your example of going to the pharmacy was a really good one. But instead of saying to yourself, oh, you know what, Gus, you're an idiot for going to the pharmacy and that screaming child and those lights have made you feel terrible, the message instead you've got to be telling your brain is, well done. Because you know what?
Yeah.
You could have sat at home today, you could have had a Netflix day, but you got out of bed, you've got in the car or walked to the pharmacy, you've gone out in the fresh air, you've exercised, you've put yourself in a position to do something more than not. And we'll come on to it with the imperfect action side of things, really. But it is that recognize. And when your symptoms kick in, you go, okay, that's my threshold. That's my threshold is. So you know what? Next, let me take those 2-3 days to recover. Then I'm going to go to the pharmacy again. But this time, I'm going to go to the pharmacy. I'm going to stand outside the pharmacy until it's quiet inside. I'm going to wait here until I can see there's only 1 or 2 customers inside, and then I'll go in. And if somebody comes in whilst you're doing it and they're loud and everything again, you know, you'll just jig the balance again. And that's the same with all the tasks. I often talk about in the videos I do and things like that about journaling. And journaling is a key thing, because if you journal when your symptoms kick in, you know where the action is then. You know where that symptom has kicked in, and you can say, that's my threshold. So, okay, I'm going to work to that threshold for a week. I'm going to work to that threshold. For some people earlier on, that threshold might be they can work to it for 2-3 days. But because obviously you're a couple of years down the line, what's happened is every time something like this has happened, that negative brain cycle, the connection in your brain that formed after your concussion, is just reminding yourself that actually, you know what, you can't do this. You can't do this. You go to the pharmacy, you're going to get noise. As a result of the noise, you're going to feel terrible. You're going to then feel terrible every time you do it. So that means the next time you think to yourself, I need to go to the pharmacy, what's going to be happening is they're going to go, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then I'm going to feel rubbish again. And when I talk about that cycle side of things, and I can talk to you more off of it because I'm aware we've got to crack on a little bit, but with that cycle, it's not about going from 1 to 100 miles an hour. Like my running wasn't me going from I couldn't walk to the corner shop to let's run 2 miles every day, because it just would have never happened. I would have put myself in hospital. It was about putting myself in a position where I could test where that boundary was, and I moved it a little bit, even if it was just a few steps. And even if at the end of those 100 days, I could only walk a mile instead of half a mile, or as I said at the start, I couldn't even walk half a mile, that would have been a victory for me. And I would have obviously recognized, and to be honest, I didn't understand at the time why that meant I'd recovered or not recovered. It's only afterwards where I've learned about the connections in our brain, that by me taking positive action every single day, whether that was doing something or not doing something, it actually fed into everything else I was doing. So I started doing more around the home, started going back to work from working from home, and then I started going back into the office from 2 hours a day. But 2 hours a day meant traveling into London on trains and tubes, and then sitting in the office for 2 hours, by which time I was exhausted, and then sleeping on the train home. So yeah, it's a balance on that threshold side of things. But yes, I better crack on. Yes. But by all means, if you want to talk about it more, drop me a message. I'm more than happy, as you can tell, to just waffle on about it. Anyway, I'm also aware loads come up in the chat, so I'm going to do the last 2 pages, folks, and then I'm going to read what you've put there, Bev. At the end, okay? Whilst I'm doing this bit, whilst you're listening, do me a favour as well, just pop in the chat if where in the world you're from, because I'm always fascinated about where people have kind of popped up from. So yes, right, let's crack on, Cole. Hopefully everybody's back. If not, as I say, there will be a recording of it. Come on, Cole. There we go. Imperfect action, the good side of imperfect action. And what we're talking about with imperfect action is obviously doing something or not, well, always taking action, but whether we're in a good space or a not good space, there are ways that we can do it and not. And it kind of feeds back into what I've already talked about a little bit anyway. So let's use a good example of it. And this probably feeds into what you were just talking about, Gus, actually, those Netflix days. So if you designate yourself a Netflix day, and I'll use it as an example because you very kindly come on and spoke to me about it, but you're not feeling 100%, you're feeling sluggish. Okay, you're going to have a Netflix day. You're going to be staring at a screen anyway, engaging in whatever content it is you're watching. So why not take yourself a little break at some point? How often do we look at our phones every day to either go onto Facebook groups or look at messages or look at silly TikTok videos or cats laughing or dogs talking or whatever it might be? How many times do we do that? Well, instead, when we pick up our phone, why don't we just pop ourselves into a little brain game? And I think I can send out a list. There's an article about 10 or 20 most popular brain game ones, but it can be anything. Like one of the ones I've got is Woodoku, which is like Sudoku with the numbers, but with just wood bits. It's a bit like the old Tetris. Try and fit your things into a gap, because your brain's working. While it's doing it, it's working. And where your brain works, it grows the hippocampus, the memory part of your brain, the big working computer in the middle. And when the working computer is swelling and working better, it naturally releases chemicals into your brain that make you feel better about doing other things. So when I say to you, imperfect action, if you're not feeling great, there's always something you can do. Those green chores that we were talking about that generally don't make you feel any worse, or that you need to do, find those. Write yourself a list. Write yourself a list of green chores around the house. Things that are going to make you feel good about the fact that you did those, even though you weren't feeling great. So yeah, the example obviously here I've talked about is the fatigue is the obvious one. It's a massive thing. It doesn't take a lot for us to fatigue ourselves. For me, going through all this learning that I've done in the last 2 years, that exhausted me on a regular basis, a lot. And you know what? I had to remind myself to stop, even though I'm basically recovered. I say 95% recovered is how I describe it. I still have to remind myself to stop sometimes. But yeah, fatigue is an obvious one. You're pretty tired, but even on those days that I'm fatigued, there's still things I need to do. I still need to wash the dishes. I still need to, take the dogs for a walk. Yes, it might only be a 15-minute walk instead of an hour walk, but it's still a walk. It's still some fresh air. Reflection on what you can do, or what do I do in those circumstances. And this is part of building up that threshold, building up your list of what's good, what's bad, what's in the middle somewhere. Because as I say, we all have different responsibilities. We engage that subconscious part of our brain. So I'm picking on you, Gus, because you very kindly had the conversation with me. But the Netflix side of things, your subconscious brain is watching the telly and not even really thinking about it, but it's taking in information as you're doing it. When we do stuff on our phone, our Facebooks, are commenting on things, a lot of the time we're not necessarily thinking about what we're typing or what we're writing. A lot of the stuff we might have written before, or posted, or messaged a friend, or something like that, they're all subconscious things. If you get into a game, you get a bit addicted to a game. We all know we have that tendency somewhere along the line. And I won't mention all the random ones out there, but there are games on our phones that at some point potentially you've been addicted to, going right back to the old Nokia phones that had Snake on it. Going around the screen. Sorry, I'm old. But yes, that subconscious part of the brain can then get itself involved in those. So the brain is working, the brain is learning without even realizing it's doing it. And if the brain's not realizing it's doing it, it's not working hard, it's not going to make you more fatigued in doing it. It's like sitting there and watching Netflix, or watching the TV, or listening to the radio, or something of that nature. Or even the job that you do that you can do with your eyes closed and your arms tied behind your back. You're still learning as you're doing things, you just don't necessarily realize it. And that is what our brain is made up of, 95% subconscious, which is all the things we've learned since birth that we don't have to think how we do. So when we're eating our meal and we're using a fork and we're stabbing something and we're putting it in our mouth, we're not thinking about how we stab that thing and put it in our mouth, unless that connection was affected with your brain injury, but generally not. Or how we drink from a glass, or how we do something. Those subconscious parts of our brain is still getting our brain working, and you're doing loads of those all day long. But yeah, incorporate something into that day. Maybe brain games, or if you've got to do something with your family. When I was struggling, I've got 2 kids. And when I was struggling, I used to say to them, I'm having a really rough day, but you know what? I'm going to rest throughout the day, but you know what? We'll play a game later on. As long as we don't mind just lowering the volume a little bit on the game, let's play a game together later on. And as I got through that, whether it was Uno or Monopoly or one of those other ones, I did that and incorporated that into my day. And it just engages the brain into the learning without realizing, and then enhances its processing speed. And as it processes things, as I said, with my example with the exercise, as I did more and more, my brain was able to do more and more without even realizing it was doing it. And that's where I kind of recovered in my side of things. So even though you're not necessarily feeling great on a particular day, do something. Even if it's those little things, do something that's going to make you feel good about the fact that you did those things. Even if it's just writing a bill or making an online bank payment for something, just something that you might ordinarily maybe put off because you feel a bit rubbish. Do something. Yes, last slide, well, sort of last slide. The bad side of it, The bad side of it. Okay. You can all see the writing on the screen. So I'm going to describe it in probably a different way than that's on the screen, really. Is one of the comments I often hear, very early on especially, and I'm sure we can all resonate with this, is, I wish I was like the old me. I wish I could do everything that I used to be able to do. Okay. My example is an interesting one. The day I collapsed, I was working my second job, and I'd been running around after the kids all day. I took the kids back, an hour drive to drop them off to their mums, an hour drive back. I'd run classes in the morning all morning long with 2 to 7 year olds, teaching them rugby. Then I dropped the kids. I'd done meals. I'd cooked dinner, lunchy dinner on a Sunday. And then I got back home, and I was meant to be running for the charity that I just spoke to. And I was about to go out at 10 o'clock at night, having not eaten dinner, not really drunk enough, and done way too much, knowing that I was going to be at work for my day job at 7 a.m. in the morning. And then I collapsed. So when this conversation came in, and again, I only learned it further down the line. So please don't think I'm some special human being that learned this right from the start, where I was able to say, oh yeah, it's fine if you can't do what you used to be able to do. No, that picture of Carl sat on the sofa feeling miserable, that was Carl wishing he could do half the things that he used to be able to do. And it's a massively key thing to recognize the fact that, okay, right now I can't do it. Maybe what happened to me is a little bit of a thing saying you need to slow down a little bit. We all learn different things from what's happened to us. Okay. My work days are 12-hour days. My day job still is 12-hour days. I want to get away from that as soon as possible. But I also knew that I couldn't really do anything else around that. That was probably enough on those working days, really. So imperfect action, a bad example. You're having a good day. You're reminding yourself of what you used to do. Maybe you used to go out with your friends to have a drink or two. Drinking's not too great for brain injury, by the way, folks. Or you do a big job in the city. As I say, I tried to go back to work after 2 weeks after my concussion and almost had a meltdown in the middle of a tube station in London. But you're sort of having a good day and you think to yourself, well, what could I be doing? I know I really need to do this really big job for work. So you sit down at your laptop and you start typing away frantically for 4 hours, and you're in your subconscious part of the brain, but because you're having to do a lot more work than you have been doing for the previous however long you've been injured, by the end of it, crash, bang, wallop. Okay. Or you've got the long grass sitting outside and you think, I haven't mowed that all summer, or the bathrooms and the kitchen are all filthy, dirty and hideous, and you're thinking, oh, I might have a guest around tomorrow, I better go and clean the entire house. It all falls back into that red, amber, green I was talking about, folks. Just because you're having a good day, but you're not quite sure what to do with yourself, yes, you want to do something, but don't overdo it. That threshold that me and Gus were talking about there in the break, that threshold is your point. You can probably go 5% above that threshold and get away with it without even realizing it at the moment. But if you try and go 50% above that threshold, yeah, as you say, you might be wiped out for a day, 3 days, a week, or something else like that. So this is where planning is part of it. And the planning works into the processing part of your brain as well. So when I talk about this, whether it's perfect action or perfect inaction, or whichever of these options works for you, a massively key part of that is going to be recognizing where you're at, what you can do and what you can't do. If you've got yourself that list, if you've planned ahead, and I've got my own little version of it. I call it the 3-day, 3-hour plan. Let's assume we're awake for 15 hours a day and we're having our solid 9 hours sleep, because we need those 2 hours of non-REM sleep to get the brain resting. So you're having your solid 9 hours. You've got 15 hours in your day. Pick one job for each of those 3 hours. Don't do 4 or 5 jobs in those 3 hours. If one of those jobs is taking the kids to school, great. If one of those jobs is picking the kids up from school, great. You've still got 9 other hours in the day, you know. And what you will find is, as you naturally progress in planning, don't try and plan a week in front. Don't try and plan 3 weeks in front, or you've got your great-grandmother's 152nd birthday in 4 months from now, and you want to plan ahead for it. No, our brain's not going to cope with that. Our brain's not going to cope with that when it's well and healthy, let alone when we're struggling. So take it steps, baby steps. As I say, depending where you are at your journey, start small and work from there. Figure out what you can do and then build up. If you're having a goodish day, then don't push yourself so much that you're going to wipe yourself out for a few days. But do things. As we said in the other one, don't put off doing things, just don't do too much. And that's where the balance, I mentioned at the start, it's all about balance. That's where the balance all comes in. And once you find that balance, that level, and sometimes we need people to remind ourselves, whether it's people like me or people like the other people in our groups, share it with everybody. Go, you know what day are we on there? Thursday. This is my plan for Friday, Saturday, Sunday. My plan for Friday, Saturday, Sunday is this. Hold yourself accountable. And a lot of the time we can't do it to our loved ones, because our loved ones will think, well, if you're planning that you can do that, and that, then surely you can go out with our friends, or you can go out to this family thing, or you can do this, or you can do that. And it's like, oh, no, I'm planning so that I can get used to it. So my brain can cope with knowing exactly what I'm doing, and it doesn't feel overawed. It doesn't feel like I'm doing too much. So yeah, that balance bit is key. And that's the point of the whole presentation really today, folks, is about finding that balance, whether it's journaling, whether it's setting aside jobs that you know you can do, and getting inside your brain a little bit to say, this is my situation today. I've woken up feeling okay. I've woken up feeling a bit sluggish. Okay, it's a bit sluggish day. What can I do on bit sluggish days? What can I do on okay days? What can I do on really okay days? And as you go along, you will naturally find that that list adapts and moves and gets better with it. So I'm aware there's stuff in the chat, so I'm going to go on to that after I've took a drink, because I've just waffled. Oh, and we got 7 minutes. Look at that. So if you've got a question, hold on to it for a moment, because I know there's some that's, oh, there we go. The US, Iowa, Washington, fabulous. Utah, love it. I love the fact that I'm getting over to America. This is brilliant. So Bev, I'm just going to read through your few messages. I don't know if there's a question in there, but hopefully you don't mind me sharing it with everybody. It says you had a concussion nearly 2 years ago following a bike accident. Since that time, you've had various doctors, therapists, etc. One diagnosed Parkinson's. That's not the first time I've heard that. After 20 minutes of talking with you, jeepers. Okay. Thank you for not buying it, Bev. But since that time, another neurologist said it wasn't Parkinson's, but a brain injury. As a result of the accident, the injury caused Parkinson's symptoms. Well, this is the thing. If we go onto Dr. Google, it'll tell us all that we're, got something or another. We've probably all got a variant of cancer if we put our symptoms into Google. Post-concussion syndrome and following brain injury, the connections that I talked about, it isn't seen on scans. I'm having a conversation with a professor in Canada soon, and I'm hopefully having another conversation with a professor in Scotland soon. I'm learning all the time myself. I'm trying to find out if there are any scans out there whilst you're alive that can show you connections have been broken in your brain, because that's where our symptoms come from a lot of the time. Is we're learning fresh when we've had a concussion how to do certain things. We almost go back to that time of being a baby where we've come out of mom and there's bright lights and there's loads of people around, and we've been used to being in this cocooned in this lovely womb, and everything's scary and we scream our head off. Now, when we're babies, we have mom and dad to make us all feel better. When we're grown adults and we have a brain injury, people don't really tell you to feel better. They don't tell you it's okay, that's going to hurt, but you know what, it's going to get better. You don't have that soothing comfort sort of side of things, really. That's why professional athletes maybe recover a little bit quicker, because they do. They have people reminding them daily, oh yes, it's going to be fine, it's going to be better, this is all normal. Whereas probably for a lot of us, after our brain injuries, and by the sounds of it with yourself there, Bev, you didn't get a diagnosis till a lot further on. I kind of diagnosed myself with post-concussion syndrome, then went to the doctor and told them I had it, and they went, yeah, right. Thanks very much. Great, that's wonderful. The anosmia I talked about, my smell and taste loss, I found out about that 6 months after, and that was just by pure luck. So yeah, there's a lot out there that's unexplained, but it's to do with the connections in our brain and how they're affected immediately after our injury, then feeds into that negative cycle I was talking to Gus about earlier. Parkinson's symptoms, I don't know what the diagnosis is at this point, but all I know is that I am miserable with brain fog and movement issues. currently waiting on surgery for shoulder surgery to repair rotator cuff. Ooh. And you're here to listen and learn. Well, hopefully it's helped a little bit, Bev, with the listening and learning side of things. As I say, I'm open to questions, whether it's now, whether you think of something later. You will message me and probably have my email by now. So whether it's message, whether it's email, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to have conversations with people and share what I can. And as I say, I'm not like an oracle on this stuff, but obviously I've done some learning and it all makes sense for me how post-concussion and works in that sense. And that's what I'm hopefully explaining today to you. Does anybody else have any questions? I'll put everybody back up on the screen. We've got everybody. No. Okay. So without questions, folks, I will leave you in some semblance of it all. Stand by. Yes, Melissa. What I will do is anybody that's emailed me, whether they've been here or not, to be a part of this recording, I'll send the recording to you. What I found with the last workshop was the size of it. I'm not a techno person, but the size of it was too big to send over an email. So I went on to something called WeTransfer, and it sends it to your email address. So that will happen within the next week. So if you look out for an email from WeTransfer, and I'll send the brain games, Julia, yes. I'll send a WeTransfer, but you have to download it within a week. Otherwise it times out. So yeah, if you download it to somewhere, that's great. I don't know if it's too big to share to Facebook groups. I will try to share it to a group to see if it works again, but last time it didn't. Just got another comment here. Bev, you did a couple of MRIs, both showed an injury in the middle of the brain, supposedly where the dopamine is produced. So you're currently taking medication to replace it. I recently visited with a local physician who said he didn't care whether we called it PCS or Parkinson's. He wanted to help me feel better. Great that he wanted to make you feel better, but I would say a lot of us like to know what's wrong with us. So the dopamine as well, the exercise I was talking about, that naturally produces dopamine. So even on those bad days, I know you said you're waiting for shoulder surgery, so please don't go off running marathons or anything like that, Bev. But if you can work into your day some form of exercise, even if it's yoga, I say even if it's yoga because I can't do yoga, so I'm not saying yoga's easy, but yoga can be done at home is I suppose what I'm trying to suggest. Or whether it's, for most of you in America, you would call it a block, or down the street and around for ourselves, even if it's just a little bit, get out there and do a little bit of exercise. If you're at home and you need to be at home, up and down the stairs a few times, something to get the heart rate going, to get everything flowing and to go from there. Okay. Art of War Legions is a game on the phone that helps me. That sounds really complicated, Gus, I won't lie. I'll build an army and you can turn the sound off. It's always good when you can turn the sound off. They have exercises daily, and you're very welcome, Susie. Susie was one of those wonderful people in the group when I joined, right back when I was injured. That was very helpful. So I'm very grateful to Susie and the other people in the UK group. But yes, folks, thank you all for coming. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Peak and luminosity. You know what? I've got it on my phone here, brain games. What brain games? I mentioned Waduku. I quite like the Get Color one. The Get Color one is just some bottles filled with different colors, and you kind of have to figure out which ones to tip in to make each bottle the same color. It's colorful. Wordle, if the wording hasn't really been affected too much. Luminosity, Peak, Neuronation, and Elevate are specific brain games. What I would say with them is if you download them, again, it'll be on the recording, Luminosity, Peak, Neuronation, Elevate, they all have free aspects to them, but they all have paying aspects to them as well. So if you go into it and you think, oh, I've got to pay for this, Carl's giving me something I've got to pay for, I'm not making any money. The pay bit is, I don't go on to the pay bit, I just do the free bits on it. thank you, Susie, flashing screens on Elevate though. So if you've got epilepsy like myself, although mine's not flashing screen epilepsy, but just bear that in mind, okay, if the light's an aspect. But everything is trial and error a little bit. Go back to it. Don't feel afraid to go right back to that stage when you were a baby and you're learning everything new. There's no embarrassment in that. There's nothing to be afraid of that. You'll realize as you go along, you know way more than you realize. Our brain has millions and billions of connections. Everything from our ABCs and how we see the letter A, how we write the letter A, how we form a sentence with it, you know, how we hear it, is all a different connection. So we have millions of connections and millions of things there, hundreds and thousands of which you are doing daily without even realizing. Okay, so please remember that, folks. That's the positive message I'm sending to you this evening, is you don't realize how much you're already doing each day without having any symptoms. So don't be afraid to find that level and just push it a little bit each time. Okay, and reach out if you need me. So thank you, everybody. It is 8 o'clock. I will let you enjoy. If you're in the UK, in America, you're going to enjoy the rest of your day because it's afternoon. But yes, wherever you are, thank you very much. And hopefully I can do another one for you soon. I'm going to stop the recording now, folks. He says, oh, no, stop share. There we go. Still recording. Where's the recording? There it is.